Great, thanks. Hello, everybody. I hope you're all very well. Welcome to today's webinar. This is from Scan to Solution, Methods in Owner-Led Heritage Documentation. It's a pleasure to have you all here with us as we explore kind of the fascinating world of heritage documentation, and in particular, the architectural history of one of Toronto's most storied landmarks, the St. Basil's Church. So St. Basil's has kind of stood as a testament to resilience and transformation for nearly 170 years. It's been survived a fire, it's witnessed the dawn of electricity, and it's even hosted important moments in Canadian history. So it's much more than just a building. It's a living part of the community. So today's session promises to offer a bit of an intriguing mix between history, technology, methodology, and preservation. So my name's Chris Atkinson. I'm the Customer Success Manager at Cintoo, and I'll be the moderator for today's session. And I'm also joined by a fantastic panel, both of whom have been at the forefront of the digital transformation efforts for St. Basil's. So first up, we have Sebastian Gattarello. He is a reality capture specialist at iScanno. Sebastian and his team provide expert historical documentation services using laser scanning to capture the past with precision, supporting future preservation efforts also. His work and his methodology has been instrumental in documenting many historical landmarks, and specifically St. Basil's, which we'll discuss today. Next, we have Peter Skrepichuk, the planning coordinator for St. Michael's College. Peter oversees the digital transformation of the historic campus and ensures that the architectural history of St. Basil's Church, as well as the surrounding buildings, is preserved for future generations. So with the panel today, we hope to share a few insights into how the technology and how a well thought out methodology is being used to not only preserve and document, but manage St. Basil's architectural heritage into the future. So before we dive in, I know, Sebastian, you wanted to provide a few insights to kind of set the scene.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you very much, Chris. And thank you very much, everyone. The main thing I wanted to just say before we even start is just a big shout out for three key pillars in this conversation. Actually, four. One is obviously St. Basil's, and Peter, correct me if I'm wrong if I said it correct. It was St. Basil's Parish. The St. Michael's College as well, that allowed us to be able to use this and showcase this as a use case, an application use case for reality capture and overall documentation when it particularly comes from the owner-led aspect. And the other aspect is Peter being a very strong pillar and instrumental to this entire process. So I really appreciate Peter. And lastly, Cintoo as well for hosting this and providing this knowledge in point cloud and trying to disseminate that information to people from various different types of skill sets, whether you're coming from 0 or coming from 50 or going to all the way of full integration and digitalization, I think is very important. The second portion here is just a quick asterisk, which is this isn't just a how to do scan to BIM or scan to CAD. A lot of times we look at this when it comes to reality capture solutions, we show a lot of pyrotechnics and we show a lot of information technologies on how to capture. But when it comes to longevity of data, finding the fullest extent of reality capture and trying to apply that with something like this, where we're using an owner-led and an owner-owned data, how do you find that longevity? How do you find more value out of that data set beyond the scanning and into the data? So anyways, want to start from there. But once again, big shout out to all four members here and looking forward to the next steps.
Thanks, Sebastian. I appreciate that. Yes, so let's quickly run through today's agenda and kind of the things we've got planned for the next hour. So we're going to really start by looking at the project scope and the unique challenges involved in preserving something like St. Basil's Church. Apologies if I'm pronouncing that wrong, Peter. It's my English accent. But we'll be focusing on the architectural and the historical considerations that have guided the preservation efforts of the team here. Then what we will do is we'll dive in a little bit deeper on the adopted scanning approach and the data strategy. We'll explore how a multi-sensor approach provides, a fuller picture of the site's architecture. And then we'll look at how the owners themselves can maintain control of the digital assets through structured and modular documentation. I think that's a really important point, because it all ends towards ensuring the long-term management, accessibility, and evolution of the continuing to grow data set. And finally, after we've kind of got in the problems and then how we've adopted it, I want to kind of come back full circle. I want to come back and look at the measurable impact. What has this work done? What has it meant for St. Basil's and the university? And how has it led them into a more efficient preservation and operational outcomes? But before we jump straight into that, a few items for webinar logistics. As we said, the session is being recorded, so we'll be able to revisit that later. If you do have any questions during the presentations, please feel free to use the chat function. We'll do our best to answer them as we go, but we will aim to leave some time at the end to address any that are outstanding. And I'd like to now hand over to Peter, the planning coordinator of the University of St. Michael's. And Peter will give us a fascinating backstory about the historic St. Basil's. Thanks, Peter.
No problem. So this slide here it's partially to do with the history, but also like with the project itself. So this summarizes the overall project from our initial issue of having only a couple of drawings and not a lot of as-built documentation for St. Basil's Church and Odette Hall, which is attached. Together we call them Clover Hill. So we started from having a lack of information. We then tried to do manual drawings, and that helped to some degree, but then we decided to go with 3D laser scanning. So we engaged iScanno, and over several days, we captured this building, both inside and outside. And that created the point cloud, which we then uploaded to Cintoo. And this allowed us to then make notes on it and already use it with the mesh as a initial as-built documentation. We then started with the process of modeling it. And then that sort of finished. Although there's several revisions that we're still going through.
Many revisions, Peter.
Yes. Okay, and then we can look at the general history overall, which is that yeah, exactly. So here is on the left here we have one of two original documents that we have for St. Basil's and St. Michael's College. This is a ground plan of the college, 1854, circa 1854 to 1855. This, along with the bird's eye view, are the two main documents, together with textual documents, letters, newspaper descriptions, and the like, that give us an idea of what the architect William Hay planned and what was actually built. It was designed in a style popular at the time, Gothic Revival, and it includes several features that are, if not unique, they're great examples of them. So, for example, the open timber roof that was there originally was meant to be a very prominent feature. This is from the architect himself, his descriptions of it. There's also the brick, which came from just north of here in Yorkville, and the timber, which came from around here as well. And it was all built over the course of 2 years. It started in the fall of 1855, finished in the fall of 1856. There is also overall several challenges that we have with this building because of the age of it, and it presents several preservation challenges, keeping up with the brickwork, keeping up with the woodwork, over the total of 42,872 square feet of the complex. If we go to the next
There's
slide.
a lot of iterations that you mentioned too throughout the history, right?
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
You'll see there's also yeah, exactly, yeah. So here's where we see the complex history of this building. There were several additions and then also several modifications. So we start with the original. This is the other of the two drawings, the bird's eye view. We start with those two drawings, then we move to the actual construction, which didn't completely follow the plan, but built a portion of it, which is the dark purple in the overall framework in the middle. And then the first picture we have is from 1860, and that's taken from the tower of University of Toronto, nearly completed. And you can see there that it followed the plan, but it didn't complete it. Then we have the phase 3 here, which is the first edition, and then we have the south edition, and then we have the spire on top of that. There were other editions as well, and those were later demolished. But as you can see from the ground plan, it is a fairly complicated building history.
And just to almost cross-reference, this probably applies to a lot of other buildings as well throughout.
The buildings, yeah, like 170 years. I mean, this for a while, this was the main campus of St. Michael, University of St. Michael's College. Like this, there were no other outbuildings. This was it, and so they did have to expand. And then as they moved out to different sites, those wings were no longer needed, and we took them down. So it's a very complex history.
Right. And I think where we look at this in terms of other buildings as well, whether that is in other locations, that this is a usual trend where it gets lost in time, lost in history, and lost in different people when it comes to handoffs and just city planning. You had to I can see right here that you had to go through the archives just to find these images. Just as an example, right? There's an entire process to it.
Yeah, there are no drawings from each of these phases that these pictures represent. There is no architectural documentation for them. We do not have the as-builts. We do not even have the initial designs for them, other than those 2 drawings. After this, we start to get some drawings, like going into like the 1920s, we start to pick up drawings again. But up until then, we're relying heavily on images and newspaper reports and letters that people might have written about the buildings.
You have to be your own detective in this process.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, no.
We can go to, yeah, exactly. So that's the outside. This is the inside. So the building can be divided into 2 phases. On the left here, we have the original interior. This picture is from 1904, but this is the interior that dates to the original 1855-1856 construction. And so with the north and south expansions, they pretty much continued that open timber roof. We then went to say 1918, 1919, the pastor at the time decided that it was too difficult to heat the building, and so they put in a drop plaster vaulted ceiling, and that's what we see today. It's basically attached to the original wooden structure, and it really starts when you're looking on the inside from the top of these columns. Up to the top of these columns, that's just basically the original woodwork that's just painted white. But above the capitals of those columns, that's where the plaster starts to take over, and you can't really determine the original interior. You have to go upstairs into the attic in order to see that.
So as the structure ages, so does the complexity, I'm assuming, because you not only have a gap of information, but you also have another issue, which is when you're trying to do maybe a capital project or renovations, you don't have these kind of documentations that are very key when it comes.
Yeah, like you can see visibly when you go inside the church, you can see this structure, but it's not. You have to go above to understand fully how this building works, and that can be difficult sometimes. There are like above the nave, the central vessel, there is access, but above the aisles there isn't. It's encapsulated, and so in order to understand that, you literally have to go up there and create access and then scan, as we did, in order to fully understand what we're looking at. And that's where you get into problems with, like, say, roofing or any issues with this plaster vaulting, that you really can't fully understand how the structure works until you understand what's above there. And because there's a lack of drawings, it really led to, like, in earlier projects, like say in the 70s and 80s, where they were just guessing what was up there. And sometimes that led to solutions that worked, and sometimes it led to solutions that didn't fully work.
Does it happen even today, or no, not as much?
Well, since we scan, no. Like now we understand what's up there. But yeah, I would say even like say a decade ago, there were still issues of when they were starting to re-roof, like put new slate onto the church. There were still misunderstandings about how the wooden trusses worked, like how the rafters worked, how the deck worked. Like they were just sort of guessing until they removed the slate and figured it out.
So, I mean, I have the video here. I will just get the video right here. That I know that Peter, you want to record it here, pre-record, and then I know that Chris, we want to jump into that Cintoo platform as well a little bit, just to understand a little bit more on the church level. But I'll just play this video just as a way to show an overview, because similar to what you just mentioned, Peter, here.
Yeah, exactly. This is the church that we see now.
Yeah.
This is from 1919,
Mhm.
with variations. Like there's slight modifications, but essentially unchanged since 1919.
And then you have also the different levels, so you can get an ortho cut in the middle of it, which will provide that. But this is just sort of part of the visualizing feature, but then there's more of that analytic feature that I know we'll touch upon, Chris.
Yeah,
Here.
and then you as you break through the threshold here of the plaster vaulting, now you're into what remains of the original.
Mhm.
And so it's not like the original was wiped out and they just then they removed the timber roofing or timber structure and then put the new plaster vaulting in. This is sort of attached to it. It's the original timber structure is still there. It's still, and that's what actually is structural. Like that's what's providing the strength here. It's not the plaster roof itself that couldn't hold itself up unless it was attached to the wooden structure above. So it's still important to understand how that wooden structure operates, because it's like when you look at it and when it was initially put in, as the wood shrunk, like there is changes in the structure over time in this. It does move. So like understanding the wood structure above is important to us, and that really the scanning really allowed us to do that.
And so this is where we're going back to that portion here, which was a not only a difficult access point, but also it provided a lot more of that heritage grade quality that you were looking for.
Yeah, exactly. This is with the plaster vaulting removed
Mhm.
in Cintoo here. Then we're looking at the scans of just the attic spaces, essentially, with two access points, one from the church, one from the college side.
Mhm.
But together they provide what we have available.
Right.
We can create model, look at, understand. Yeah, here you see the the reverse side of the plaster vaulting and its
Yep.
supports and how it attaches to the original wooden trusses. And you have
Mhm.
some of the open tracery work still visible there.
And just I know we would have to bring this up, Chris, but in the Cinto platform, there's comments too that are attached to different parts, and so
Yeah.
just like we talked about there. So, but I guess in this part, and I only put this in a recording here, Peter, is because I know this part was not only very important, but it also provided the originality of the structure too. So it was
Yeah.
like sort of so what made this important because during the
Well,
cap.
this like what you're looking at here is this is over top of the aisles as opposed to the over top of the nave, and this was the area that was literally like until we opened this up and scanned it last year, this had been no one had seen it since 1918. Like this was enclosed. It was not we could not get this detail, and we only have three images of what the church looked like in on the interior before the plaster vaulting was added. And so trying to get that information from those three images is it's difficult. And so this provides the necessary information for us.
Yeah, difficult to scan too, Peter. Many.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, but no, I think one of the main things that, as you mentioned, is like it was difficult not only to scan, but once you have the originality and something that's not been documented, I do notice that it does change the entire almost planning on your end too, as an organization, as an owner as well, because now you consider this extra variable. And so, as the study is, it's the scanning becomes almost a study itself. And I guess we won't go ahead of myself because I think Chris, when you land on that platform, you're going to see that we can put a lot of technical information, a lot of documentation, but it does allow us to see things that we didn't see before. And of course, as the owner, someone that has to work with the building day to day, these are critical pieces because this helps them articulate why they're within their stakeholders, but also their contractors as well, particularly for the capital project side too. And Peter, I know that you don't want that ambiguity there. Oh, Chris, you say something.
Yeah, certainly. It's obviously, I mean, even the area that we're looking at in the ceiling here, that's hidden away from usual view. Nobody can see it, but the historical preservation and value of those trusses from the original roof space are still very, very important.
Yeah.
So yeah, the documentation of even these really tight, awkward spaces to get into, I think it
Hmm.
really shows really quite nicely in the mesh format.
Yeah. And I think that's a good part there. I'll stop sharing the screen for you, Chris, there, and you can jump on the platform. You wanted to do that.
Yeah, sure.
Uh,
So just to show a little bit of the environment before we jump back into the slides, is obviously this is the church inside the Cintoo platform. Obviously, we can move from scan position to scan position. What Cintoo is actually doing is it's transforming the point cloud to a solid mesh surface. Again, I really do feel that it's easier to interpret a mesh than it is a point cloud. And I think we can show the quality of those findings in certain areas where we have a lot of detail. So if we drop down into this area here, for example, and we just allow this to stream in, we can make out the stonework on the front of that in terms of
this is critical to even model or to do anything when it comes to working step by step with
exactly. And I did see a question there in the chat, and it's relating to accuracy, which I know you'll touch on a little bit as we go down. But in terms of Cintoo, we obviously take our patented technologies to take that full scan resolution of the scanner, convert that point cloud to the mesh, and do the reverse conversion again, whilst retaining that source resolution of the scan. And I think a good thing with obviously the modularized section and the work zones inside Cintoo, which you can see down the left-hand side, has allowed the teams to essentially look at the building and then turn on and off elements that they need. They might not scan the full project in 1 day, in 2 days, in several days, in months. It will be a bit piece, planning the works and going in. And again, those areas of the data sets can be very quickly turned on and off as required.
And I know, Peter, this helped you quite a bit, because then it allowed you to also be able to talk with me when it came to areas that you wanted to model, areas that you wanted to put more attention to, additional areas that you want to have more density mesh as well, which then allowed us also as a modeling team and the team overall to get you more of that higher, not only visual fidelity with that specific area, but also more detail as well. And so you can sort of transition and pivot to from an LOD 300 to 350 to maybe 400 or 450 more heritage grade information. But we didn't have to do
it. Allows us to make notes on it so that we don't physically need to go there every single time if we want to overlook it.
And Chris, there actually is some notes on the 3D viewer side and the comments. I'm not sure the comments section might be able to find it there. Right. We have to go on the full.
Let me have a look. Let me go on the full one and go to the reporting. And then what we can see here is some areas where we have made comments on there.
So Peter, those are like some of the aspects that you mentioned, which
that's the pile of drawings.
So we click that image. I want to just show it just for comedic value, but also what happens. So what happened when we first came and sat down with Peter? This was what's going on. He had all these documentation, a scroll of sorts, an assortment of a bunch of information,
and fragments of the drawings that you can piece together later on if you have time.
Yeah, exactly. And so then we had to find a way to, let's do some studies. I mean, from the owner standpoint, we obviously want them to do the study, particularly since it's also an academic institution. But at the same time, let's find a way to put this all together. We use this as references of CADs and when it comes to scan to CAD workflow. But when it came to using Cintoo, we did use and attach a lot of this information throughout the project, which was great, actually.
Yeah, this is.
I'll hand back to Sebastian, to Peter on the slides, if that's okay.
Oh, sure. So I know, Peter, that I'll share screen here again. So I know that there's a couple of points here that you want to share, and I know one of them was a repeated point, but all good. Let me show you this part. So this part, I know you want to share, I know that the first two is a bit repeated, but the first and last one there. Right.
Yeah. We're dealing with roughly 50 drawings, 2 from the 1850s, the rest from 1920s onwards. And you had issues with it's because every time someone wanted to do a project in there, say a reflooring or re-roofing or work on the plaster vaulting, they essentially had to make the drawings from scratch again because the dimensions on the various drawings don't align, they don't match up. And so and there's areas that just don't have any drawings at all. So that creates problems all the time with any project that might be contemplated. Like there's nothing to transfer to the architect or the engineer in order for them to work with. They've got to go from scratch. And so we've tried doing that manually to fixing it, but it helped a little bit, but there's still like the scans and the point cloud online has really helped. Whether I need to send it out to a contractor or if I'm sending it to someone in our organization to describe a point, like it is very helpful.
That's awesome. And I guess that also helps with the historical gaps that we mentioned throughout
Yeah.
time.
So now we're dealing with we're dealing with a document like a set of scans. We've got accuracy 3 millimeters. So like I'm dealing with a new set of as-built drawings, essentially as-built documentation for this structure that I can rely on. I don't have to worry and go remeasure it. And it covers areas that just didn't have drawings to begin with. So it's more comprehensive, it's more accurate, and I'm able to send it out to different people whenever I need to.
So I guess on my side here, this is where we go into the scanning and data strategy approach, because I know that Peter and I, and of course, with now more insight using platforms like Cintoo and using Cintoo essentially here, it came to the strategy and the importance of, and I know, Peter, don't worry, we're just clicking and scanning. It's good. No words there. But my main thing here was scanning throughout the church. Now, the scanning process, a lot of times when we do it, we're just going to scan and we just end the delivery of the data. But there's a lot of information within that data. I know a lot of people are going to say, well, what kind of insight do I get from that data? Now, you can do your own kind of reporting. There are softwares today, but when it comes to leveraging a software like Cintoo here, it gives me a degree of flexibility of working with the owner and working in tandem with the owner. I think a lot of times when we're looking at this, we're trying to just do our service and walk away and not seek a little bit more of a value behind the scanning, because a lot of times people are just looking for the as-built drawings, right? When we first talked, Peter, you and I were looking at the as-built drawings. We're just looking at scan to CAD or scan to BIM, and then that's it. But the moment we were able to use an ecosystem or platform, it allowed us to do a little bit more. And just to touch upon the tools we use, because I think, Pete, you asked that question. You asked if we use drones. We didn't use drones. I know Flyability is a great product and it can certainly use and work in these tight spaces. We use mostly terrestrial scanning because the level of accuracy was needed. And we did about like 500 scans, Peter. I think that's like the number. And we made it to
Yeah, we're at 541 right now.
541 scans, and we have an accuracy with a lot of the QAing and just working on different softwares, whether it's Cloud Compare or Scene. At least that's what we use, because we use the Faro terrestrial scanner. In this context, it was about 3.5 to 4 millimeters in terms of the point cloud accuracy. We worked very closely with Peter, iterating until we get this perfect measurement, and then this is where we import it. But we did actually at one point, and I'll just show you the terrestrial scanner here. This is one of the parts that we were using with the terrestrial scanner, showing you a little bit of the platform as well when it converted that into mesh. And this was very important because it allowed us to not only show more value on the product, on what service we're providing, but also gave us a little bit easier workflows when it comes to modeling. And I think that anyone that does scan to BIM modeling on any platforms, whether that's in Revit, Revisto, AutoCAD, they're going to see this become a very massive tool when it comes to this kind of work, and or if the institution has their own modeling team. On the other front, and Peter, I just use a little bit of B-roll. This is something that we actually work with. I want to give a big shout out to my buddy Kevin. He works in FJ. FJ Dynamics let us use one of their scanners to at least try and to do rapid documentation. And there's a reason why I want to bring this up. Based on the project we did, we required high definition and very high-end scanning. In Canada, we use LiDAR scanning, United States 3D laser scanning, and the Brits, of course, use high-definition surveying, different words for the same terminology. Main thing is we required that level of detail because part of our initial implementation strategy was to use a platform, and then this platform happened to be Cintoo, and that was something that we realized the scan to mesh requires a fairly high density of data. Now, having said that, we actually used a fairly inexpensive scanner of a P1 scanner, Triton P1 with Kevin, which worked in FJ. And these are the up and coming new SLAM kind of scanners. And we got to see it be used. And we got to see it used in two different aspects. One on the capturing flow, and it was fairly quickly. We had anchor points, we had control points that helped us, of course, register everything. And so you're sort of seeing that data right now. On the other front, which I don't have the footage for that, we're able to bring this into Cintoo, because I know that SLAM type of data, they don't have sort of a terrestrial or stationary point, but the new update, I think, was you're able to unify that information. So using rapid documentation like a mobile scanner or a SLAM type of scanner, we did see that there was value, because I believe the Cintoo algorithm does allow us to flatten a lot of the normals, and it allows us to actually give us a little bit better data in the end. But you can see that this was done in 15 seconds. It was very, very quickly. And we were able to also put what we call virtual points on it. So it was even more useful from a standpoint of rapid documentation. So whether you, as an owner looking for services or purchasing your own scanner, need to use a TLS or SLAM, both options from a standpoint of at least a service provider and a standpoint of using this is possible, but it's all dependent on what kind of gradient and what kind of resolution and what kind of accuracy you look for. Chris, you want to jump in, I know.
Yeah, I was just going to say, spot on. The idea is, the question has always been about accuracy with every scanner now, but we've got a much wider landscape of technology choices. And often we're seeing now speed versus accuracy, and it's often a balancing act to find the right level between the two. But we should really be asking ourselves questions of who is going to be touching further down the line. What is their use case? What preservation efforts is this information going to be used for? So, for example, the timber roof space, the terrestrial laser scanner was the right tool of choice for that accuracy and documenting the detail in that area. But if we wanted to capture the external of the building and simply walk around with a SLAM, that's fine. And, Cintoo's great at bringing all those technologies into one collaborative environment.
So how did you incorporate the data into the facility and space management? Travis, we'll answer that question soon, I think, as we'll go on, because space management, which is like the virtual staging portion, and then the incorporating the data into facility and space management, as long as you have the proper platform and you're using the right kind of modules within all of the platform Cintoo, but also what kind of capturing method are you also using too. So a lot of times we think of just virtual staging, bringing in a foreign asset, an IFC file into a platform, but this is where I think we're going to go into that next point. So and I want to bring this slide here because I think that's also going with what Travis and what you just mentioned as well, Chris. The industry is changing, and the industry is changing in a couple of ways. And I like to really be a little bit flexible on that aspect of the industry, because we are starting to deviate from the traditional as-built scanning approach. Can you bring an idea on cost of the program software? I wish I could. So the aspect today on the industry, when what we're seeing today is we're moving away. We're going to two separate fronts. On one end, we're doing a very quick scan to BIM, scan to CAD workflow, where I'm going in and I'm scanning, I provide them the 2D drawing. So I'm scanning, I process, I give them the BIM. That's it. The reason I use the word BIM, we know it's a workflow, but a lot of clients have been using that word BIM. It's a 3D Revit model, it's a Navisworks file, it's ArchiCAD, whatever kind of output that is. A lot of times we are trying to bring this to the client, and then this is where we walk away. We act very much like a traditional surveyor, and this happens a lot because of the GC influence and construction influence. You just do a job, you walk away. But when it comes to owner-led work, there's a change of terminology and there's a change in the method. And this is where I think the revamping the workflows can be very, very important. On one end, there's a part where we have to sit down with the client. I know that, Peter, we did a project previous to this job in St. Basil's where we did a scan to CAD workflow. But as we were going and exploring what were the long-term, effects on the platform and what are the long-term, use cases, I started to realize two separate things. One, your stakeholders are multifaceted. You're dealing with capital projects, you're dealing with facility managers, and you're dealing with also management or administration that may not have all the knowledge in the world when it comes to implementing reality capture in their workspace, and or a degree of apprehension. So we got to make that empathetic bridge that's really important when it comes to the platform and when it comes to also providing those services. The second thing is when we align what we're looking for, this is where we can scan. We don't even have to give a deliverable, a 2D, a 3D CAD, which means that we somewhat cut costs because we're going to start giving them something they're looking for when it comes to an on-field workplace. Three, we then take the raw data. We work very closely with Peter. We want a QA and QC because it's owner-owned. Owner-owned is different than an engineer and integrator coming in, doing a project and leaving and taking that data set and having a silo over it. Whether they find longevity of the data, that's different than the owner. The owner tends to use this data for a longer period of time if they want to find real value. And as a service provider, I think it's really important to do that. And three, we start looking at the right tools and details. So when Peter described his day-to-day work, he was, and I know, Peter, you say you're not in capital projects, you work more at the coordinator level. You still work a lot in the project management, the day-to-day. You work on the operations. And I see two different factors here. You work in a dynamic workplace, and we're bringing static information. But how do we make this data and information not as static as we usually do? And this is where I think where the linchpin becomes platforms and platforms that do work, and in this case, Cintoo, because it allows us to use a semi-dynamic platform because it requires you to feed into that platform. And we will go more into detail on that, and I know Chris will bring that up too. And the other aspect is creating usable data. Usable data means data that makes sense to them, data that makes people that are coming from zero to get into something that is new, which is the reality capture portion, which is the point cloud. But on the other front, it's also people that already experience. And we want to find a way to complement both parties. Because I know, Peter, that you have people that already use scanning data, use scanning before, whether they know how to use it fully, at least they have a general concept. We want to have them involved in that conversation as an owner-led project. And the people that have coming from zero, and I know, Peter, when you first use reality capture information, you're coming from very little knowledge on how to use it because a lot of it was based on let the service provider do it, we take care of the rest. And there was little conversation on that front on your end, Peter. So, I mean, and we learned together a lot of this too, because this became an organic methodology. And so then this is where operation maintenance integration comes in. And operation maintenance and integration is, I think, the missing element when it comes to what it means to bring data into an owner-led facility. And this could be a food processing plant, but in this case, this is heritage. And the reason why heritage is a unique example is because you're dealing with academia, public funds to an extent, and you're also dealing with the delicacy and nature of knowledge and the knowledge portion. Some people know a lot, and some people are coming from zero. Some people need to get and start somewhere. So I'm going to see a message. I think that Chris. Oh yeah, for sure. We'll put that in there. So there's a couple questions I ask, and these are just high-level questions before we even do scanning. And I think it's something that we should be asking when it comes to implementing this, heritage site and workflows into your own facilities. One is, what is your current what do you currently consolidate your history and on-site data? So a lot of people, when they come to drawings, Peter mentioned that he had an entire staff of scrolls, essentially. And this idea of the consolidation of data and trying to merge this all together is super important. So what's going on with your data right now, whether that's physical or digital? What's going on? Two, what are the challenges you face with the fragmented legacy documentation? And once we understood that there was a lot of information that were parceled, and Peter actually hand drew everything. This is actually a big shout out to him on this one, because it showed a lot of not only dedication, but it also showed the want, the need that the St. Michael's College and the parish was looking for when it comes to trying to preserve this. And then there's just different elements, which I think I'll go a little bit forward on that because obviously for time purposes. So a lot of times we think, don't forget the O and AECO. And what is AECO? AEC first is architect, engineering, construction. And the O part is operation maintenance. And I think the O part is a lot of times negated because we think once we do the handoff, we're done. But this O has a place where different stakeholders are working day to day in their operations. And a lot of times in the industry, and I used to work in it, I used to use the terminology facility managers. I think it's a bit of a overused term, or asset managers, and there's no in between. Facility management, a lot of times, is just day-to-day operations, working on what's going on the structure and the facility, a very task management and task-oriented approach. And then asset management tends to be a spreadsheet, looking at overall costs, capital projects, looking at how do we get this for the best value. And what is in between? And I think, Peter, you work on the in-between world. You're working on the day-to-day operations, and you also work on the portion where it is looking at the total cost. And this is where you need to use an ecosystem and an organic one, be it to that platform. And so this is sort of what I really want to reiterate. And I think we can go in more detail as we go over this with you, Chris, here too, with the platform. It's a couple of central pieces when it comes to the methodologies of workflow, when it comes to owner-led information. You're dealing with most people in owner-led information are coming from zero. And you need to bring them to something. And the digital twin or digitalization initiative has to come from understanding people's stakeholders, understanding who's involved. Peter's a unique use case because Peter is coming from the day-to-day operations and also has an overall macro perspective. So you have two layers in this conversation. The second one is making strategic goals that are actually actionable. Why do I say that? Because it's depending on their budget. What do they have? What do they want? Is it possible? The needs and wants and what they currently have, do we have to really reinvest in it? No one likes revolution, people like evolution. And I think that that's something that is really important when it comes to understanding what they currently have. Peter had very good knowledge on AutoCAD and Revit. And so that means that if I gave him a deliverable of AutoCAD and Revit, he didn't have to retrain. He didn't have to learn about coordination tools and that front. So it's understanding where's one's place right now. And then the other part is collaborative discovery, facilities explore and annotate on 3D data and environment. Why do I bring this up? Because the moment that I scan, I have the data. We don't even have to model yet. We can model piecemeal. That helps Peter's budgeting. That helps also to align expectations, and it helps me as a service provider to just provide the scans, review the scans on a platform. And in this case, it was Cintoo, because Cintoo allowed us to use that multimodal approach and also integrate certain types of sensors, and then sit down with Peter's people as well and to understand what are the needs and requirements for their current projects, whether that is a capital project that's happening in 1 month where we make a basic AutoCAD drawing to an entire complexity of redoing certain types of shivs in the attic. We are able to now at least take one step at a time and not do this whole, almost overwhelm the final user when it comes to this. And then the data planning, which is very important. We have to sit down, ask the right questions, and then executing and impacting. And all this sort of merges together into Cintoo, because Cintoo becomes a central repository. It becomes an execution, but also becomes a feedback loop. The more you feed into Cintoo and the platforms of that, the easier it becomes to help Peter's organization to understand what's going on. Because like I said, you're dealing with static information. Scanning is not real time. To an extent it can be, but scanning is not real time. So it's static information and it's a dynamic organization. And this is the most dynamically static piece of information, which is the platform, which is Cintoo in this case, and the dynamic operations to work in tandem. Because in the end, you're not working in front, you're not working from behind, you're working in tandem with the organization. For owners, it's very important for them to have control of the data and to know what the maximum output can be with that data. So, I mean, it's a little bit of a spiel on my end, but I mean, Peter and Chris, if you want to add any parts there, it'd be greatly appreciated.
Yeah, I think just to add to that a little bit is obviously you're quite right in saying, the scan data is a snapshot in time, but it's the most accurate snapshot in time and the nearest we have to an as-built. Yeah. Historic buildings, this has been there for 170 years standing. During that time, it's going to move, it's going to deform, it's going to bend, it's going to get bashed, things are going to get chipped and broken, brickwork's going to deteriorate. So it's the scan data that actually gives us the opportunity to see what is there, to do that remote working, that remote inspection. And again, just hats off to the guys, because it's a great job and a greatly organized and modularized data set that sits inside Cintoo currently. Okay, so I think the final section of today, just conscious of time, I want to kind of put this out a little bit, because we often go through and tell these fantastic stories about building and preservation and the methodology behind it, but we kind of sometimes leave the most important bit, the ROI, the measurable impact that not only Sebastian's seen, but Peter and the university as well. So we want to kind of ask a few questions between the panel as we go. So Sebastian, one for you, given your experience on this particular project, what do you think the biggest gains are in terms of time and cost savings? And, can you walk us through some of the numbers or the outcomes that have stood out for you?
Yeah, I think the first one is working closely. It's almost like an account management platform. So working closely with Peter throughout the process, and that alleviates a lot of that ambiguity in information. A lot of times when I provide a point cloud data set, it's just reviewed. Sometimes I can't even open the RCP because it's too heavy. And then being able to work on capturing specific areas of the site and being able to almost use this as a puzzle piece, and then find a way to cross collaborate with Peter and the team. That way, it allows me to not spend as much time of figuring things out of what kind of deliverables and actionable deliverables, what kind of drawing disciplines I need to provide them. And then in the end, it also allows me to find a longer relation with the organization and more value, where I feel like once I walk away, if once again, we do 100% everything we need to do on this, but if and when I walk away from it, because we're working on other projects, they're in good hands, and it creates peace of mind. So my peace of mind actually is priceless on this front. But it also allows me to at least give a better service to organizations like Peter, particularly owner-led organizations, that they have to maximize the data I've provided them.
Yeah, I agree. I think, the ability of you guys having this partnership working together to both benefit the project, that in-depth scoping of the project, and obviously the detailed methodology to understand, different technologies for different areas, for different requirements, and modularizing it, as you said. So kind of given that combination of the methodology that you had kind of initially lined out and how it ended up with the Cintoo platform, to deliver the results, what kind of difficulties would you have seen if you weren't utilizing something like Cintoo? What would have been more difficult or time consuming for you?
So Peter, I mean, we'd like to have your perspective first. If we didn't use a platform like Cintoo, what would you think of it?
Well, it would require us to like physically go and look at details. Like it would be much more difficult to communicate about problems with both the point cloud and later on with the development of the drawings and model. Like this is the platform that allowed us to communicate like from media owner to the service provider, like what I wanted to see, what I wasn't seeing, what like any issues I had, or if I wanted something focused on, like it was very quickly. We could talk to different team
As you
members.
can tell, too, there's areas that we scanned twice in the very similar location
Yeah.
because wanted to get certain elements that were very important. And at first, I didn't really understand why. So why are you making me scan the same spot? But it's like changing the density and the quality of that terrestrial scanning shot. I started to realize there's actually a story behind it, and there's a story behind it where I didn't know because I'm just going in and scanning. I'm coming from that mindset, and then that actually allowed us from a standpoint of converting this into mesh and then being able to make a very, very precise and very high-end a model of it that could be used for future, maybe perhaps 3D printing down the road, or it could provide, or it is just to provide much more image fidelity for the organization and the team, and in this case, for preservation. And I think once again, those are things that are time is the biggest thing. I think that we can't really get back, and this reduces our time on getting the feedback and creating that feedback loop that allows us to have a cross-channel collaboration.
It allows like the time in terms of like that is an issue. Like from the point of like you scanned it over a couple of days,
Yep.
and then you deliver your point cloud to me like a week or two later. Like I don't have to wait for models and drawings to come out. Like I can literally from the time you give me the point cloud, I can upload it into Cintoo and we can start using it. We can start sending it to different team members. We can start looking at it as if it was as if it is the as-built documentation. So like it does speed things up. Otherwise, you're going to wait, months potentially.
It could be if it's a really high-end model, you wait months because that's I mean, this is the level of detail in QA and QC, and I think that's something you really hit on, Peter, over the head there because I agree. You get a lot faster value of the data set that you get provided, and you're able to work in your organization a lot faster too. And because of that, your organization sees the value much quicker as well. So you can start immediately.
Say we weren't going to go to model right away, like if we were just going to have this, like that is a cost savings for us. Like we can scan a building in 1 or 2 days and put this up onto Cintoo, and we can use this as built documentation until we later on need to have like as built and the CAD drawings. Like we can use this as a start, and it is cost effective for us.
Sure, that's fantastic. And obviously the process of the modeling and the kind of building information model that's coming out of it, that can be loaded into Cintoo as well to see the kind of the two visualized and compared against one the other to see any deviations between the two, which is a fantastic side. So for you, Peter, obviously adopting something like Cintoo, what was kind of the learning curve like for you? Was it manageable, and kind of did you receive any kind of feedback from the team that were working remotely in terms of how easily they were able to access and interpret the data?
Yeah, I mean it is fairly easy. It's fairly once you basically have to spend some time in the environment with a point cloud, and once you do it, it becomes very quickly. You can operate with it easily. You can take your measurements. You can take your sections. You can send out to different people like the invites to share whatever you've created, whether it's the measurements, annotations, or the sections. So it did not take long to figure out how to use the software.
That's fantastic. That's what we always like to hear. But, having access to that kind of real-time data, on any device, via the cloud, anywhere that you might be, did that change any of the ways that you kind of planned future works or collaborated with the teams?
It's another element that we look at. So instead of having to go and worry about the accuracy of the drawings, we can, when we're planning a project initially, we can look at this as the alternative. This is accurate. This is what's there. So if the drawings say one thing and this says another thing, I'm going to trust this more than I trust my drawings. Yeah, it's definitely the first thing I go to when we're looking at a project. I'll look at the building in Cintoo before I start tracking down the historical documents that I need when planning a project.
Okay, fantastic. So I think one thing we've kind of established is, that there were significant time reductions of actually being on site to go and take measurements, to kind of be there and do an in-person inspection. So, kind of what of these specific workflows became kind of more efficient? Did you find that people were reducing the number of site visits they did dramatically, or do you feel they were going in and taking measurements? What kind of workflows were you becoming more efficient because of this reduced?
It's a mix, right? For myself, I'm definitely other than the fact that I like going to the site, I don't have to visit every single time I need a piece of information. I can go whether I'm at home or whether I'm here. I can just in my office. I can go onto Cintoo and go to the point cloud and take my measurements, make my annotations, create a report, and send it out to whoever I need to. For others, for the most part, they do try and use the point cloud as what that I send them to. So it's a process of getting people used to it, but it is happening.
Okay,
it's starting to happen more and more, right, Peter?
Exactly. Yeah.
There's a buy-in that takes time when it comes to using this platform, right? So.
Okay. And obviously from a university kind of perspective, avoiding the IT investment because you're using a cloud-based technology, how did that kind of play into the long-term planning and operations of what you're doing going forward?
Well, so because we can store our data within on servers in our country, that was important to us. And so in terms of security aspect, we were happy with that. And in terms of being able to share it with people on the single platform, even though we have one subscription, I can still send it to other people in our organization, and it's cost effective for us that way.
It becomes its own CMS system, where you're actually working on a platform where you can at least discuss upon certain types of initiatives, because I know that the university certainly have maybe a general conversation beforehand. There's a very due process approach on this. And because of those budgets and initiatives being met, you need to have an effective form of showing it, visualizing, but also discussing perhaps the different stages. And it goes back to that world of asset management and capital project management. And then you're coming also as the guy on the field right now, and this, Peter, and it allows you to almost legitimize a lot of things you've been mentioning throughout the time with the so, but absolutely.
Yeah. So obviously going back to kind of the data ownership part of the discussion, and it was in the title of today's webinar, I kind of wanted to understand what maintaining full ownership of the project data means to you, Peter, and the university, and kind of what possibilities for future renovations or archival purposes does that open up?
Yeah, the ownership of the information is very important to us. We want to have that information. We have it backed up. We have it stored. It's basically a copy of the building that we can, if we need to, load it back up onto Cintoo. If we want to model further, we don't have to go and scan again. We have that data already. So it's the well that you go to when you need other deliverables.
And I think that goes really well right from the beginning of today, where you were showing the various stages of refurbishment and addition of the original church over the years and saying, we didn't have drawings for these. Now those will kind of be available as St. Basil's goes into its next 170 years.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so yeah, do you see the kind of the way that I'm looking at this, and conscious of time a little bit, my apologies, is kind of in hindsight. Obviously, we've mentioned Cintoo a little bit in this really important story, but kind of just to put this out to both of you, kind of what made Cintoo the right choice for this project?
I'll probably jump on that right now, but the main thing that I looked at it, at least as a service provider, was to provide longevity of the project, and from at least a professional setting. When we look at people going for a scan to BIM workflow or scan to CAD workflow, and there is different stakeholders involved, we know that there is an important aspect of longer use case of that data, because the amount of time I saw Peter referring to the RCP, when I saw Peter looking at the E57, trying to navigate on this complex piece of information, it was almost taking away a lot of the efforts that Peter was trying to do, the institution was trying to promote, and it was trying to find a much more effective and efficient avenue on the digitalization process. As the university improves its infrastructure and its workflows, their CMS systems have to improve, their capital project processes have to improve, and in tandem, their digitalization process have to improve. So this allowed us to use this platform, Cintoo, where we were able to get immediate returns of their investment that they put, and they gave us that privilege to do so, but also for Peter to continue to push forward, promote, and provide the longevity of the historical documentation efforts, because it's both an academic exercise, it's a methodological exercise working with the client and working with an owner, but it's also an exercise in which it's an initiative that really requires the owner to push forward. And this, in my opinion, was a way for them to come from zero, the quickest, with little knowledge of any VDC team in the organization, to use it and to have almost their internal VDC team, to be able to bring this to their contractors and to articulate this with their internal institutions. That's sort of how I looked at why Cintoo became a very good platform. And of course, with all the other features as well, annotations, measurements, and scan to mesh was very helpful for me as a
definitely agree.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Cautious of time a little bit. I know there are one or two questions in there. I just want to try and address those before we look to close. Apologies if we haven't got round to answer any. They are logged, so we will look to follow up and provide an email with a response to it. But one from Mohammed there, talking about how long it took you to cover basically the whole project from A to Z, and kind of what kind of manpower was needed. He says he's trying to do a similar project, and he's trying to come up with some time and cost elements of that.
I can't give him cost because that'd give me too much of the secret recipe, but I can tell him. I can tell him time. I mean, it took about 5 to 6 days to capture everything, but we're using high density data. So one of the things we have to obviously consider, particularly for heritage, is if there's processions taken about, or there's a lot of moving parts, right? So you want to be able to have the least amount of people. So Peter, you and I sort of strategized on the on-site scanning portion, and you looked at the times where we could be in access certain areas. I mean, scanning an area like the bell tower when the bell's going on is not good for the scanner or good with the data, and not good for our ears. But at the same time, it's just, what areas of what it's accessible at the time. So then from that standpoint, if you're looking for the BIM model, you have to be very articulate with the client. The reason I use, once again, BIM is because you do 3D modeling and 2D CAD, particularly for heritage grade. Heritage grade is not just making an AutoCAD. It's a drawing of 2D. It's usually going into details, into the minutia. And I think, once again, Cintoo helps us do that. So you work very closely with the client, work very closely with the owner, and have an empathetic bridge with them. Know that they're coming from zero. Ask the right leading questions, and I think you will be able to solve that, how long it took. You can't just give a price. If they only ask for a price, I don't think they're going to be people that are looking for truly digitalizing their workspace. And I think they're just looking for as-built drawings, so you can then give them a price for that. So from that standpoint.
Yeah. Fantastic. There is a final one there that's just come in from Travis. Does this tie into FM platforms, and can you select the VAV and add data parameters to it? Travis, we're not going to go in that in too much detail today, but what I would suggest you do is to take a look at the Cintoo.com website, particularly take a look at some of the asset tagging features. Typically, and today we talked about a scan to BIM process. Essentially, we're tracing over the top of the scan data to build that database, that structure behind it, and add additional metadata. But Cintoo has a really cool asset tagging function that allows our AI to literally find the elements for you in the space and then allow you to add additional metadata and parameters to it. So hopefully that'll be of interest to you. Okay, we're 2 minutes over. My apologies. Firstly, I'd like to thank the panel, Peter and Sebastian. A pleasure as always. Thanks for such a detailed story. We really do appreciate it. Thanks to all the attendees for tuning in, for listening. I hope you found something and could take something away from today. And again, if you do need to follow up, you can find us at cintoo.com, or again, you can email us at sales@cintoo.com. Thanks very much. We appreciate it. Have a great day. We hope you're all well. Thanks.
Hey, thank you very much, Chris. Thank you very much, Peter. Thank you very much, St. Michael's University, and of course, St. Basil's Parish as well. There, good. Got it, Peter? That's the right one? Okay, so St. Basil's Parish for all this. And like I said, feel free to reach out to all three parties here, because in the end, we're trying to do this from here. And this, I think, can cross-pollinate and translate to other institutions and other owner-led groups. And feel free to talk to Peter, myself, and Chris for that. Thank you very much, everyone.
Well said, Sebastian. Thanks very much. Have a great day.